Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Flying Cat Marketing interview series. Today I have Emilia Korczynska, who's head of marketing at Userpilot. Emilia is passionate about SaaS products, product marketing, and scaling content operations. She built a workflow at Userpilot that allowed it to go from 4 to 40 blog posts per month. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Hi, Emilia. How are you?
Hey, Maeva. I'm good. How are you?
I'm also good. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today because, well, I find it very relevant to what we do at Flying Cat. We also scale a lot of, we publish hundreds of articles a month for our clients, and we have our own way of doing content operations, which we figured out on our own. And just, I think most content departments are like that. Especially when they become dedicated to content operations, you figure out how to do it, you build your system, but there's no one way fits all. And it's so interesting to look into the operations of another department. And I also think it's so interesting for us to talk about this today because, in the state of the world, as it is right now, I think businesses really do need to focus on organic. They need to focus on how they're going to be doing it efficiently, doing the lowest effort with the highest impact. So it's just so relevant today.
Yeah, absolutely. You see what's going on in the startup world, right? That the budgets are being cut, and basically the companies that have been splashing out and hiring dozens of employees are now laying them off, right? So organic is a super good channel because it scales, and you get an infinite return on investment pretty much if you rank it well. Yeah, that was kind of the reason why we went after it, right? Because honestly, I joined Userpilot when it was a super small startup, so we didn't really have a large marketing budget. And we started doing content because it felt like something we could break into with the budget that we had. Right? It costs like a few $100s, say, per week to publish one blog post. That's acceptable, but with other kind of campaigns, outbound or even, paid campaigns, you need to start from the threshold of spending tens of thousands of dollars, like immediately to see any results. So obviously we couldn't afford it, and that's why we chose content. But then after about 2 years of doing it, and of course growing as a company quite rapidly, we tried a lot of different things, and then we just realized that content was the thing that was giving us the most ROI. So our consultant who scaled his content operations, his company really, he was the VP of marketing at a similar SaaS product. He went from 2.5 to 11.5 million in 2 years with content and Google Ads, right? Oh. So yeah, it was huge. And he was like, why do you keep doing all these different things like webinars, sponsored newsletters, whatnot, when the only thing that is pretty much driving leads consistently when it comes to, like sheer numbers, say 65, 70% is organic, right? And we were like, yeah, why?
That's true.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to get from 4 to 40? Or better question, how long did it take you at 4 to realize we need to publish way more? And then what was the process to get to 40?
Yeah, so as I said, it was around 2 years. At this point, I still wasn't the decision maker. So I joined Userpilot like halfway through these 2 years. And then towards the end of my first year at Userpilot, we kind of decided, right, we need to change something because we're spreading ourselves too thinly. Yeah, it wasn't sort of an obvious decision, right? Because when you're small and you don't have resources, you're kind of trying to do everything. And that's not the way to go, right? So I would wholeheartedly advise every small startup these days to just focus on the one thing that is really driving leads. Of course, you need a period of experimentation, but I think 2 years was a bit too long, right? Yeah, we could have realized that earlier.
So in 2 years, by the end of the 2 years, you said, okay, actually, this is what we're going to focus on. Let's scale this up because it works. And so from that moment, how long did it take you to get to 40 per month?
not very long, about 5-6 months. And the only reason it took 5-6 months was because it was kind of trial and error when it comes to the systems, right? Yeah. So initially, when we made the decision to kind of 10x our content output, we were like, right, we are really, difficult, technical. I mean, it's not difficult to use, but it's difficult to understand for a freelance writer who has no experience in B2B SaaS, especially in like product related. We are a product for product management, for product marketing, customer success. So obviously it's not a topic that any kind of lifestyle blog writer could handle. Our audience is pretty sophisticated. We are writing on like quite sophisticated topics. I don't know, like what's the difference between the North Star metric and the one metric that matters, right? Like if you asked any person on the street or even any like generalist content writer about this, they wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we felt like the only way to scale is to hire people in-house full-time, right? We tried a bit with agencies. It kind of was the same, that we felt like they weren't investing enough time to understand the product, to understand the whole industry and the personas. So we have like a bunch of different personas, in fact. So yeah, we felt like this is the only way to go. And we started hiring the right people who have like B2B SaaS and ideally product or customer success or UX experience. Was super hard. So we spent like 6-8 weeks doing that. And then, they started, and the expectation was that, well, if we are to get to 40 blog posts per month, right, with 4 full-time writers, they need to write 10 blog posts per month each. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't sound like so much, right? It was like 2.5, 3 blog posts per week. So initially they were kind of ramping up, and I was taking them longer, and we thought they would get there, but they didn't. In fact, like a lot of them said they are burning out, and 3 out of 4 quit within the first 3 months. I'm like, what went wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't take a genius. If you hire people who have so much experience in these like more sophisticated fields, and you give them a role that kind of feels transactional, right? And you ask them to write a lot of content on pretty much the same topics, because, there are so many variations of keywords that we wanted to cover, right? Because we were sort of behind our competitors who have been on the market for, you name it, 6 to 10 years, obviously. So, they felt just bored of writing, like product tools software, and then writing like best SaaS onboarding software over and over, and they were quitting. So I'm like, all right, this is not going to work out that way. What else can we do? And I just spent a good week talking to content managers, both in agencies and in-house, learning about how they were doing things. Mm-hmm. And like I still wasn't entirely clear, because as you said at the beginning, everyone has their own process, and when you Google it, it seems there is like no market standard. But then one night it just kind of clicked for me. So I came up with this process that we called content epics system. That basically, it's kind of similar to, the HubSpot's content cluster strategy, right? We basically clustered our keyword research around 10 topics that basically, are related either to the problems Userpilot is solving, or, to competitors, the tools that are out there as alternatives, or, our personas. And essentially, 10 times 4 weeks per month, right? That equals 40 posts. That's why we picked these 10 epics. And then we just found 10 freelance content writers and assigned one to each of the epics, right? So that was the first difference, that instead of expecting one person to write like a lot of content, we distributed the sort of responsibility and avoided the single point of failure, right? That if one person drops out, that's like 25% of our content output suddenly goes out of the window. And But it wasn't really the game changer because, of course, like we were still back to square one, right? So the problem with hiring people who are not specialists remained. So what we did, we essentially promoted our only remaining content writer, who was very, very smart, very good at what she was doing, to content editor. And we introduced this role, sort of a person that creates very, very detailed briefs and manages the whole content pipeline for the writers, who are working with her. So initially I took like this role as well. So basically together with Adina, we were managing 5 writers each and producing 5 briefs per week each, which was a lot of work with all the other responsibilities that I obviously had. But yeah, this system has worked out. So essentially having a person that manages quality and that is very knowledgeable about the product and the personas and can just focus on that, was the game changer. Because you can produce 5 briefs per week easily, right, with right brief templates, with sort of some confidence in the industry and in the process. It really only takes like 2 hours to produce a good brief. But obviously you can't write 5 blog posts per week. No. Yeah. So
okay, amazing. So
that was the difference.
It sounds like the content editor at Userpilot plays the role. It's managing the project and also some strategic part. You're selecting the topics, right? And doing the editing?
No, not anymore. So the head of content, so again, Adina, who was our first content writer just over a year ago, she's now the head of content and she's responsible for the strategy. So the editors are only creating the briefs and then checking, the ready-made post against the briefs. So they don't even publish the content themselves. They don't even proofread it. They pass it on once they are happy with the content when it comes to like factual errors, basically execution of the topic, right? So all the talking points that were listed on the brief included, all the headings included in the right order. Does everything make sense logically? Then they pass it on when the content passes this first test. Then they pass it on to a proofreader, who then checks it for like small language errors and SEO compliance. So yeah.
And the SEO compliance. So the proofreader actually is SEO savvy. They understand how to, or do you have a checklist they follow?
So actually we have a growth manager who's like responsible for SEO in a Userpilot, and we have a checklist. So the proofreader just needs to be good at proofreading, right? But they have a very discrete checklist that they literally need to tick off, right? Okay. So is the first link in the post this, right? Like are all the alt texts relevant to the images, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially our writers write in Surfer SEO editor. So that already safeguards the kind of first drafts SEO quality, right, related to the keyword that we want to optimize this particular post for. And then when they have finished the first draft in Surfer and achieved 80 content score, right, so that's 80 out of 100, then they move it to StoryChief, right, which in turn is kind of a content management system tool, which allows the editors to communicate with the writers effectively by leaving them comments and like fixing small errors there. And yeah, that has an inbuilt plugin that is kind of more similar to Yoast SEO. So it kind of cross-references the content score from Surfer, which works differently because that's actually based on SERPs, right? Rather than best practices, but then kind of in StoryChief, we also check it for best practices, and then the final checks are done by the proofreader. So as you see, it's kind of Ford-esque process, which is just like a factory, right? So very distributed responsibility for specific discrete tasks.
Does the writer also get the checklist, or they just have the score that they have to meet in Surfer SEO, score that they have to meet in StoryChief, and then the proofreader just looks at the checklist?
No, they do have to get the checklist, because otherwise they wouldn't know like what to do, right? So Surfer doesn't tell you exactly, like which link to put where. So this is like our internal SOP that we have developed. So essentially, when we onboard the writer, we give them a lot of resources that are related to Userpilot, related to our internal processes that get properly, broken into the system. So yeah, they do follow that checklist as well, but then the proofreader just checks if they did follow it.
Okay, cool. And you don't use Google Docs, for example, to everything isn't managed in StoryChief?
No, we don't use Google Docs, because StoryChief allows you to essentially create a ready-made final draft that is ready to be pushed everywhere. So it's also a distribution platform, which is really cool, because then you put the alt text in StoryChief, you put all the images there, you put all the right links with the right tags, right? So if you want to make a no follow tag, basically add a no follow link, that's also part of the checklist, right? So if someone needs to link to an external site that might be ranking for the same keyword, then we ask them to no follow that link, right? To do follow the links that are, say, high authority, or obviously all internal links. So StoryChief allows you to do all that, right? Directly there, plus write all the meta tags, meta description, meta title, social media posts as well, and then push it from StoryChief to your blog, all your social media channels with different posts that are adjusted for the channel, and Medium with a canonical tag, which is also what we are doing to basically distribute the content. So we find it a lot more efficient to do it there.
Yeah. Interesting. And the brief, you can also house that on StoryChief, or do you write the brief on a separate?
No, we write the brief in Notion, right? And then usually the writer pastes the brief into Surfer editor, right? And that probably already gives them a score of 50, right? Just the brief, because the brief, as I said, is super detailed. It includes all the headings the way they should go, right? And then in bullet points, all the talking points that we need in any specific paragraph, all the images, all the links we need in every paragraph. So literally for the writer, it's paint by numbers, right? But still not everyone can do that. So we thought that, okay, with these briefs, we put an average intelligent chimpanzee, in front of the computer, and they can write an excellent, specialist post. And it still turned out that, some people, even people who work as professional content writers, they just don't read instructions.
Yeah.
Or there are people who don't understand the logical connections between different points, right? Of course, we don't assume that as their fault. We always investigate, okay, can we improve our briefs further? Was something not clear, right? But initially I thought, well, there are no bad writers, there are just bad systems.
Not true.
And now I know, no, it's not true, right?
Well, I think the problem there is that there's so many content writers who actually they're just not passionate about writing. They just Googled what job can I do for my computer? And that's why they're in it. It's not because they love writing, they love research, they love connecting the dots. That's a topic for a whole other episode.
Definitely.
But okay, so what bottlenecks? You have a pretty solid system here. How did you get there? What challenges did you face that made you learn and say, we need to change this, we need to tweak this one?
Yeah, so a lot of different challenges, really. The biggest challenge that we still haven't solved is, the challenge that, now that we've removed the bottlenecks from the writer's role, we have the bottlenecks in the editor's role. So since we started, which was around a year ago, like really when we arrived at how the process should look like exactly, we hired 2 more full-time editors, and we have also worked with some freelance editors. So it is possible, after onboarding someone and kind of teaching them what Userpilot is about, like letting them play with the platform, because a lot of our content is really bottom of the funnel and requires, the writer, the editor really to take a lot of screenshots and really understand how things are done with Userpilot. So this is still a challenge, right? We hired these 2 full-time editors, we onboarded them, but they are still not, I feel like, fully onboarded, even after like a couple of months. They still sometimes have challenges understanding how to execute a certain process with Userpilot, right? Or see the connection, right, between a certain problem that we are discussing in SaaS and how it should be solved with Userpilot.
Yeah.
Right. So as I said, like, someone needs to accrue a lot of tacit knowledge in product management and product marketing, UX as well, to see these things. And these people who already have that background knowledge rarely want to work as content editors. So that's still our challenge, which we have been trying to solve with better tools, right? And also better systems. So having brief templates for pretty much every epic, every type of content that we are creating. And recently, since going on Brighton SEO, I've been kind of flirting with programmatic SEO and trying to figure out how we could use AI to assist us in writing. And I spent like the whole day just sort of doing this yesterday. But unfortunately, in our niche, right, AI is still doing a horrible job, really. So it's writing things. Some of the tools wrote things that were like grammatically correct, and it kind of read like English. But it was also like, it wasn't much different from a really bad content writer who has done very little research, has poor research skills, and is doing this, like, I don't know if you've read this article by Grow and Convert, mirage content, right? So essentially, it sounds like English, it sounds like it's saying something, but it's in fact saying nothing, right? It's just sort of beating around the bush and writing these very generic statements that don't really mean anything, that are not helpful, that are not answering the questions or solving the problems that we want to solve with this text. So it's pretty useless, right? And sometimes it's like completely factually wrong. So I don't know how it pulls these random data out of the blue.
I've heard that. I've heard somehow, I've tried playing around with it. I'm not very good at adopting new technology, so it was very confusing for me. But I've heard that somehow you have to give it the facts and instruct it. You have to do all the research up front and give it to them. But still, even then, I know it's intelligent artificially, but how is it connecting the dots? How much information can you give it to understand what the day-to-day is for the actual user or the buyer? It just seems hard.
To me, at this point, it defies the purpose. So I spent a large part of the day yesterday just compiling, the information to feed into it, into like a large matrix, right? And then I was feeding it the information I was supposed to kind of write up, right? But it will still trip itself up, right?
Yeah.
So I see the only kind of use case that I see for us at this point, right, would be to repurpose some content, like using, these tools that kind of rewrite it in a smart way. Because as I said, like, obviously there is a lot of content we could repurpose and recycle, but we don't want to run into the issue of duplicate content, so we need to like rewrite it. And so that could work, but I find like just compiling the information and feeding it into AI and then fixing still like sometimes the random outputs is more work than actually writing the briefs. So it took me significantly longer to do that, right? And it doesn't justify, because like we managed to really reduce the costs of our content operations a lot by implementing this process. So for us, it wouldn't be even a cost saving, right? So unless it gets better at research, which is what I was expecting it to do, right? Because writing things up itself is not the biggest problem, right? Retrieving information, like what I did myself with filling in this matrix, like weeding through dozens of websites in G2 and fetching these talking points and understanding what you're reading, right? To get the right answers to like what is the difference between Pendo checklist and AppQ's checklist, right? I mean, the content is out there. If you score through a few, like review sites, you can find it. So I was quite shocked that AI couldn't, right? Because this is exactly what I expected it to do, not just patch grammatically correct sentences together. But it seems we have so far with AI focused on the linguistic aspect rather than, like the semantic aspect of it.
Absolutely. I think that it has a long way to go.
Yeah.
Last question. Actually, I have 2 more questions, but I'll see if I can keep it short and sweet. In this process, do you actually do any internal or external subject matter expert interviews? Do you have that as a part of the process? Or is that what the content editors provide?
Yeah, they should be, but they don't really have time at this point. So, so we do have some external writers that are subject matter experts, and they contribute like these more thought leadership articles. We do have some like webinar series, product heroes, that are very like high level thought leadership, basically discussing some topical issues or someone's personal experience. So we try to like repurpose them into written content as well, and then feed that content into other posts where we can, for instance, quote these people. But this is something we need to do more of. And that's like my main conclusion, that we need to bake sourcing original insights into the content process.
Definitely. When you do that, we'll follow up and have another episode. Last question. This one's short and sweet. If there's one thing you could tell yourself from when you started doing organic content, from what you know now, what's the one key takeaway?
I guess systems, not people, right? Focus on creating reliable, well-documented systems rather than looking for, unicorn writers who know it all. That would have saved me a lot of time. And in general, like focus on it faster, right? Like do one thing once and then move on to another channel instead of trying to, do everything with a team of one. So that was a bit too ambitious. I don't know. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah. I guess it could be also interesting to like hear a little bit. Maybe it will be too long for this episode, but about your process and how it's different. So like the listeners can also compare and.
Yeah, totally. So there's a lot of overlap, but we have roles, for example, that are slightly different. So we have the strategist, and the strategist is the one who also creates briefs.
Okay.
But not all. The brief creation is shared between the strategist and the editor. So the strategist will provide all the SEO information needed, the internal links, the funnel stage of the reader, the purpose of the blog post, search intent, etc. And we use ClearScope instead of Surfer SEO. And then they write just the main keywords that need to be in the subheadings. So not exactly the order of the piece or how it's going to be, but the main keywords that need to go in there. And then when it gets passed to the editor enriches, makes it a whole outline that flows and gives a lot more instruction to the writers. They also write the narrative angle. So the editors work very closely with the product marketers or sales or whoever it is that our contact person is on the client side, and they really fill that out. And then it gets passed on to the writer. We manage it all in ClickUp. So there's there's the outline stage. The outline stage gets approved by the outline gets then approved by the strategist. Then it goes on to the first draft, etc. And what I was most interested about, I mean, not most interested, it was all fascinating, but we're doing it all on Google Docs right now. And then the whole uploading is Indeed. Then you have to take it and go put it into the CMS. So after this episode, I'm going to go definitely look into StoryChief.
Yeah. It saves us so much time, both in terms of feedback and in terms of distribution.
Yeah, absolutely. Emilia, where's the best place for somebody to learn more from you? I know that you do have a Patreon as well for content operations. That's really good. What do you want to tell us to do right now?
Yeah, I mean, by all means, get in touch with me on LinkedIn. We can hop on a call to discuss things if you'd like to bounce some ideas off how to organize your content operation. I do like the Growth mentorship for free, so that's another channel to find me, because I do get a lot of LinkedIn messages. So if I don't respond immediately, don't take it personally. I'm not trying to be rude or standoffish. It's just like I really sometimes things fall through the cracks. And the Patreon is where people can find like playbooks and the whole process that we developed documented. So there's always something if someone is like really committed to implementing it in their SaaS. I think that could help them, reduce the trial and error phase a lot.
And we'll link to it in the show notes. So if anybody wants to check it out. Thank you so much for your time. This has been an amazing half an hour with you. I love this topic. There's so much to learn from other people experimenting with content ops, trying to get the best systems down and learning. So thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Thank you so much, Minerva, as well. And have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. And for whoever's listening, watching, give it a like. Let us know you watched it. And thank you. And that's the end of the podcast right there. Hope you enjoyed the episode, but please don't go just yet. If you did enjoy this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It'll help other people like you discover us and get the same insights, and it would really help us out a lot. Thank you for being a loyal flying cat and for listening. See you next time.